Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. So today we're going to be looking at some recent NBA games, and you sent me some information about these matchups, and it seems like there's a lot to uncover here.
Yeah, definitely. You pick out some pretty fascinating games, kind of a real mix of different styles and outcomes. And I think it gives us a lot to talk about in terms of what's happening across the league right now.
Definitely. So before we get into the specifics, I guess just to give everybody a little context, we're looking at 5 games in total. We've got the Houston Rockets, who just completely blew out the Phoenix Suns 148 to 109. Then the Toronto Raptors took down the Philadelphia 76ers 127 to 109. Had a really close one between the New Orleans Pelicans and the Charlotte Hornets, with the Pelicans winning 98 to 94. The Golden State Warriors also had a huge win over the San Antonio Spurs 148 to 106. And finally, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves beating the Detroit Pistons 123 to 104.
Yeah, that Rockets game, 148 points, that's just insane to see.
Yeah, it really is. And the way they did it, it wasn't just like a close game that they managed to pull away, and they just dominated from start to finish.
Yeah, looking at the stuff you sent over, they were just relentless offensively. It says they played with this just blistering pace right from the tip-off. How does a team even prepare for that?
That's a good question. I've seen teams get hot, but to come out with that kind of energy and sustain it for an entire game, it's pretty rare. Makes you wonder what was going on with the Suns defense.
Right. You have to imagine they had some sort of game plan going in, but when a team comes at you like that, it can completely throw you off. Suddenly you're reacting instead of dictating. That can lead to all sorts of breakdowns. Missed assignments, bad communication, turnovers, and then you start forcing shots, trying to catch up, and it just snowballs.
And it wasn't just like a team-wide thing either. Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun both had monster games offensively. So it's not like you could just focus on shutting down one guy.
Exactly. When you have multiple guys scoring like that, it puts so much pressure on the defense. They have to be aware of threats all over the court. And it opens up opportunities for everyone. It really shows you what the Rockets are capable of offensively when everything's clicking.
Okay, so aside from the obvious confidence boost for the Rockets, do you think this was like a sign of things to come for them, or was this more of like a one-off kind of explosion? And what about the Suns? Giving up that many points has got to be a wake-up call, right?
Yeah, potential is one thing, but consistency is another. We've
Yeah.
seen teams have these kinds of huge scoring nights before and then go back to being totally average. So the question for the Rockets is, can they replicate this kind of performance? Can they make this their identity? And for the Suns, they definitely have some soul searching to do defensively. Was it just a bad matchup? Were there specific things the Rockets were doing that they couldn't handle? Or are there just bigger fundamental issues with their defense that they need to address?
Okay, let's move on to the Raptors and the 76ers. This one seemed a little different. The information you gave me keeps talking about the Raptors' strategic brilliance in their win. So it sounds like this was more than just outscoring them. What does that even mean, strategic brilliance?
Well, I think it means having a clear game plan and then executing it flawlessly. And that game plan has to be tailored to your opponent. What are their weaknesses? How can we exploit them? What are our strengths? How can we maximize them? It could involve specific offensive plays that will get you good looks, or it could be a defensive scheme that completely disrupts what the other team wants to do. The fact that they outplayed the 76ers suggests they did both really well.
And the defense seems to be a big part of it. The sources talk about the Raptors neutralizing the 76ers' main threats. Now in a league with so much individual talent, how do you even do that? How do you stop those superstar players?
Well, you don't really stop them completely. Guys like that are going to get their points. But it's about making things as difficult as possible. Maybe you're really aggressive on the pick and roll. You try to force them into tough shots. You make them work for everything. It takes great scouting, understanding their tendencies, and then having the discipline to execute the game plan.
Yeah, and speaking of execution, Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet both had great games. The sources mentioned their versatility and their leadership.
Mhm.
How does that kind of leadership translate into a win like this?
I think it's huge. Guys like Siakam and VanVleet, they can do it all. They can score, they can defend, they can make plays for others. It makes them so difficult to game plan against. And then on top of that, they're leaders. They're making the right decisions on the court. They're communicating on defense. They're setting the tone for the whole team. When your best players are playing like that, it elevates everyone around them. And I think the fact that the 76ers struggled offensively really speaks to how effective the Raptors were as a team.
So for the Raptors, it seems like their adaptability and their ability to execute a game plan were the keys. And for the 76ers, they'll need to figure out how to be more effective when their top guys are struggling. What does this win say about the Raptors moving forward, especially in the Eastern Conference?
I think it shows they can beat anyone when they're playing at their best. They're a tough, well-coached team, and they clearly have the talent to compete with anyone in the East. And for the 76ers, it's a bit of a warning sign. If teams can figure out how to contain Embiid and Harden, they need to have other ways to score.
Okay, so we had one game that was a blowout and another where one team was clearly better. Now, let's talk about a game that went right down to the wire. The Pelicans and the Hornets. The Pelicans won 98-94, so this one sounds like it was a nail-biter. What makes a game like that come down to those final few possessions?
Well, usually it means you have two evenly matched teams, both playing with a lot of intensity. Neither team can pull away, and there are probably momentum swings throughout the game. It often comes down to who makes the big plays down the stretch. Who hits the clutch shots, who gets the key stops.
The information you sent me mentions remarkable resilience from both teams. How important is that mental toughness, that ability to bounce back in a close game like that?
It's absolutely crucial. Basketball is a game of runs. There are going to be moments when the other team goes on a big run, and you have to be able to weather the storm. You can't get discouraged. You have to stick to your game plan. You have to believe you can still win.
Now, on the Pelicans side, Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson were huge in this one, especially down the stretch. I mean, that's what you want from your stars.
Of course, in those big moments, you need your best players to step up. You need them to make the big shots, get the crucial rebounds, come up with those defensive stops. The fact that Ingram and Williamson were able to do that shows they have that clutch gene.
And even though the Hornets lost, LaMelo Ball still played well. It's always interesting to see a star player shine, even in a loss. What does that say about him and his impact on that team?
Which shows you he's a competitor, he's a talented player, and he's not afraid to go up against anyone. Even though they lost, his performance probably kept them in the game. And for his teammates, it sets an example. It shows them that he's giving everything he's got, and that can be contagious.
So for the Pelicans, this was a gutsy win, a sign that they can win those close games against good teams. And for the Hornets, it shows they can compete, but they need to find a way to close out these tight matchups. What do you think separates the teams that consistently win those close games from the teams that don't?
That's a good question. I think it comes down to a few things. Experience is definitely a factor.
Yeah.
Having been in those situations before and knowing how to handle the pressure. And then execution is key. In those final few possessions, you have to make smart decisions. You have to get good shots. You have to rebound the ball. And sometimes it just comes down to having that one guy who isn't afraid of the moment, that guy who wants the ball in his hands with the game on the line.
All right, let's shift gears again and talk about the Warriors. They just demolished the Spurs, 148-106. So this was another game that wasn't even close. What stands out to you in a win like that?
I mean, that's just pure dominance. When you see a score like that, it tells you one team was in control the entire game. And the Warriors, they're known for their precision and agility on offense. And it sounds like that was on full display in this game.
Yeah, and no surprise here, but Steph Curry and Klay Thompson were the leading scorers. I mean, when those two get going, it's almost unfair what makes them so difficult to guard.
They're just so good off the ball. They're constantly moving, setting screens for each other, cutting to the basket. It's like they never stand still. And then you combine that with their shooting ability, it's just a nightmare for defenses. Even when they don't have the ball, they're creating problems.
Yeah, and the sources also talk about their teamwork and their quick transitions. How does that stuff contribute to such a lopsided win?
Well, teamwork means everyone knows their role. Everyone is on the same page, and everyone is making the extra pass. And quick transitions, that's about turning defense into offense. You get a stop, you push the ball up the court quickly, and you try to score before the defense can get set. When you're doing all of that well, it's tough for any team to keep up, especially a younger team like the Spurs.
Right. And while the Spurs obviously lost, the sources mentioned their young players and their effort. So it sounds like they were still trying to compete even though the game was out of reach. What can a young team like that take away from a loss against a team like the Warriors?
It's a learning experience, They got to see firsthand what it takes to win at the highest level. They saw the intensity, the execution, the teamwork that the Warriors play with. It shows them what they need to strive for, what they need to work on.
So the takeaway for the Warriors is they can still dominate games like they used to. And for the Spurs, it's a lesson learned, a chance to see what the best teams in the league look like. Do you think a win like this sends a message to the rest of the NBA.
Oh, absolutely. It's a reminder that the Warriors are still a contender. They've got that championship DNA, and when they're playing like this, they're still one of the most dangerous teams in the league.
All right, we've got one more game to talk about, the Timberwolves and the Pistons. The Timberwolves won this one, 123-104. Sounds like it was a solid, controlled win for them.
Yeah, the sources talk about their balance and their strong defense, so it seems like they had a good game plan and they executed it well. They were able to limit the Pistons offensively and just kind of dictate the tempo of the game.
And Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns both had big games. It seems like they're starting to play really well together. How does that kind of two-way performance, them contributing on both ends of the court, how does that impact the whole team?
It sets a huge standard. When your best players are giving you that kind of effort on both ends of the court, it shows everyone else what they need to do, and it makes you a much tougher team to beat because you're not just relying on outscoring your opponent, you're also focused on stopping them.
And, the sources talk about the Pistons struggling to match the Timberwolves' intensity and to find scoring opportunities. It sounds like the Timberwolves were really able to impose their will on the game. What does that say about them as a team?
It shows they're maturing. They're figuring out how to win games in different ways. They don't always have to rely on their offense. They can win with their defense. They can control the pace. They can grind out wins. That kind of versatility is a sign of a good team.
Okay, so the takeaway here is the Timberwolves are looking more and more like a complete team. And for the Pistons, it's back to the drawing board. They need to find more ways to score, and they need to be able to match the intensity of good teams. What does this win mean for the Timberwolves in the West?
Well, every win counts, especially in the West. It's such a competitive conference, and every game is a battle. So a win like this against a team they should beat helps them stay in the playoff race.
Okay, so we've talked about 5 very different games. You've got the Rockets, who just exploded offensively, the Raptors, who are just too smart and too well coached, the Pelicans, who showed they can win those close ones, the Warriors, who reminded everyone how good they can be, and the Timberwolves, who are starting to put it all together.
It's amazing how many different ways there are to win in this league. One night it's about offense, the next night it's about defense, sometimes it's about star power, sometimes it's about teamwork. You really can't predict what's going to happen on any given night.
And you have to think all the teams are watching these games, taking notes, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, for sure. Coaches are constantly studying film, looking for any advantage they can find. The NBA is all about evolution. Teams are always adapting and trying to stay one step ahead.
Well, this has been a really fun deep dive. We've gotten to go beyond just the scores and really understand what happened in these games.
It's always fascinating to dig deeper and to analyze the different aspects of the game.
So, last question. Based on everything we've talked about, which of these teams do you think is best positioned for a deep playoff run? And what one factor, whether it's offense, defense, star power, whatever, do you think will be most important in the playoffs?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's really hard to say right now. All of these teams have shown flashes of brilliance, but the playoffs are a different animal. I mean, do you go with a team with the most firepower, or the team with the best defense, or the team that can handle the pressure? It's something to think about for sure.
Definitely a lot to consider. And this is just a small sample size, There's so much basketball left to be played.
That's the beauty of it, right? You never know what's going to happen.
Well, thanks for joining me for another deep dive. It's always great to have you on.
Anytime. Always a pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the world of basketball.